we try really hard to find an explanation for things, to find meaning in things, and it's really refreshing that Murakami doesn't try to do that, that he doesn't try to find a justification for existence. Perhaps there's no explanation that would justify the meaninglessness of the world, and that's okay. It's okay to acknowledge the pointlessness of things and to still continue living, and I believe that's at the heart of the majority of Murakami's works. In today's video, I'll be reading and reviewing 6 Haruki Murakami books. This video will be spoiler-free, but I'll just talk about my level of enjoyment and the main themes in each of these books. I hope you enjoy this video. So the first book I'm gonna read is Hard-Boiled Wonderland and the End of the World. I don't know anything about it, but I like the title. The cover's cool too. So I'll get started and give an update once I've read a bit of it. So I've just finished reading Hard-Boiled Wonderland and the End of the World, and I absolutely loved it. This is a story that's going to stay with me for a while. Essentially, like many Murakami novels, it does go back and forth between 2 different worlds, and then somewhere around the middle of the story, the 2 worlds converge and you kind of get an idea of what's happening. This is a novel that I know is going to sound annoying, but I do think it's good to go into it completely blind, just because the journey it takes you on, it's worth it to experience all of that for the first time and to kind of figure stuff out on your own. But if I had to pick certain words to explain what it's about, then I would pick unicorns, the mind, and what it means to be alive. Those are topics that show up constantly throughout the entire book. And the discussions revolving those topics are done in such an imaginative, original way. I honestly highly recommend this book, and I'm definitely going to be rereading it. I'll read 2 quotes that don't include any spoilers, but that I really liked. Most human activities are predicated on the assumption that life goes on. If you take that premise away, what is there left? Yet what meaning could there be if nothing was right, if nothing was fair? Fairness is a concept that holds only in limited situations, yet we want the concept to extend to everything, in and out of phase, from snails to hardware stores to married life. Maybe no one finds it, or even misses it, but fairness is like love. What is given has nothing to do with what we seek. Honestly, if you're a fan of philosophical musings, as well as discussions revolving what it means to live a full life, then I think you'll enjoy this book. I also thought it would be interesting if for each of the books I reference some of the songs that I really liked that were mentioned in the novel, just because I do know Murakami really likes to add or incorporate music in a lot of his stories. 2 songs I really liked are Bob Dylan's Like a Rolling Stone and Peter and Gordon's I Go to Pieces. I Go to Pieces is so good. I heard it for the first time yesterday and it's beautiful. Next Murakami book I'm reading is The Wind-Up Bird Chronicle. It's pretty thick, it's like almost 600 pages. And again, I don't know what it's about. I know that it starts off with this guy's cat going missing, and that's about it. excited to start reading it. I wanted to give a small update. I'm still at the very beginning. I'm at page 25. From the get-go, I was hooked from the first chapter. Typically, it takes me 50 to 100 pages to really get into a book and start that momentum going. But with this one, I have a feeling that that's not going to be the case. So far, this book is just so readable and it's such a joy. I feel like I'm not going to have any trouble getting through the whole thing. We're off to a really good start. Is it possible, in the final analysis, for one human being to achieve perfect understanding of another? We can invest enormous time and energy in serious efforts to know another person, but in the end, how close can we come to that person's essence? We convince ourselves that we know the other person well, but do we really know anything important about anyone? I started thinking seriously about such things a week after I left my job at the law firm. Never until then, never in the whole course of my life, had I grappled with questions like this. And why not? Perhaps because my hands had been full just living. I had simply been too busy to think about myself. So I finished reading The Wind-Up Bird Chronicle, and I really liked it. I might have liked it more than Hard-Boiled Wonderland and The End of the World. The piece of music this book introduced me to is Thieving Magpie, composed by Rossini. The book starts off with Toru Okada, who is a 30-year-old man. He's married, and his cat goes missing. So he begins to search for this cat, and along the way, he meets with various different people, and he begins all sorts of relationships. I really like the fact that this book has multiple stories within the story, and that just made it for such an interesting read. The fact that we got to know various different characters at a deeper level. And also, there was a lot of different mediums. There was letters, newspaper clippings, and I quite liked that. So the next book that I'll be reading is Norwegian Wood, and this is actually one of the books that I read before. I read the first chapter, and I really don't remember where the story goes from there. Perhaps as I read some more, parts of it will come back to me. But I remember liking this, so hopefully I like it the second time around as well. So I finished reading Norwegian Wood, and this book took me a considerably less amount of time to read compared to the previous two books. And I do think it was because in one way it was a simpler story to follow due to a lack of a lot of the fantastical elements that the previous two books had. But just because it was more simple in that sense does not mean that the story itself was any less complex than the previous two books. The book itself discusses a wide range of topics, and those include, but aren't limited to, grief, isolation, and death. And at the heart of the story are explorations of relationships and friendships. What I really liked is that all of it was from the point of view of a university student. I think that age range when you first get into university, usually around 18 until the beginning of your 20s, can be a really pivotal point in your life. And there are so many relationships that you develop and let go of, and ones that are briefly there and then disappear. And it can just be a really interesting time period in most people's lives. And I do think that this book perfectly reflected those relationships that you can build. The more that I think about it, I just finished this book, but the more that I think about it, the more really liked this story. I'll leave you with one quote. It's not a spoiler, but I feel like it's one of the bigger takeaways of this story. No truth can cure the sadness we feel from losing a loved one. No truth, no sincerity, no strength, no kindness can cure that sorrow. All we can do is see that sadness through to the end and learn something from it. But what we learn will be no help in facing the next sadness that comes to us without warning. As for the music, so first of all, Norwegian Wood by the Beatles, such a good song. And also, it reminded me of Hey Jude by the Beatles, which is also referenced at one point in the book. And that was a story I actually listened to a lot during my first year in uni. And I forgot how much I really liked that song until it showed up in the book. So the next Haruki Murakami book I'll be reading is Hear the Wind Sing. This was first published in 1979, and it is Haruki Murakami's very first novel. By the way, just to clarify, I'm not reading all of these books one after the other. Well, actually, the first two I did read one after the other, but then I took a bit of a break and read some other books, and then I picked up another Haruki Murakami book. So this is very much so based off of how I feel, which is why I didn't really give myself a time period for when to read these books. So I finished reading Hear the Wind Sing, and immediately after I read Pinball 1973. So essentially, these two novellas are part of the trilogy of The Rat. They follow an unnamed narrator and his friend, who's nicknamed The Rat, but they don't explain how he got that nickname. But The Rat is a really interesting character, and so is the narrator. But first, I got introduced to some new music. So Beach Boys' California Girls just puts me in a really happy mood. And also, I listened to some of Rubber Soul, the record by the Beatles. I really liked If I Needed Someone, Drive My Car, and In My Life. I really like the lyrics, especially for In My Life. In terms of the books, Hear the Wind Sing, I honestly really enjoyed. Pinball, on the other hand, I did not really like. I do tell lies on occasion. The last time was a year ago. Lies are terrible things. One could say that the greatest sins afflicting modern society are the proliferation of lies and silence. We lie through our teeth, then swallow our tongues. There was a time when everyone wanted to be cool. Toward the end of high school, I decided to express only half of what I was really feeling. I can't recall the initial reason, but for the next several years, this was how I behaved. At which point, I discovered that I had turned into a person incapable of expressing more than half of what he felt. It was things like that that made me really connect with the main character, and I felt like that was missing in Pinball. In Pinball, I really felt disconnected from the narrator, but my interest in the rat actually grew through Pinball. I will say that I looked up other reviews just because I was interested in whether or not people shared my same thoughts. And a lot of people actually liked Pinball more than Hear the Wind Sing. But there were others that were like me that preferred Wind. I felt like the writing in Pinball was a bit stronger. In Hear the Wind Sing, it was almost stripped, but perhaps it was that stripped nature that I felt really attracted to. And in Pinball, there was definitely a lot more descriptions. Regardless, I'm really glad that I read them, and I do want to read the third book, just because Murakami stated that he thinks that that is his first real work. Like these two novellas, he doesn't really count them. I would recommend these books for people that are interested in Murakami as a writer and sort of his beginnings and how his writing has evolved, because from this point to the stories that he creates now, there's definitely a big difference. But at the same time, his style is recognizable within these books. They're just premature, they're just underdeveloped. The last book I'm going to read in this video, but not the last Murakami book I'll be reading, is Colorless Sakura Tazaki and His Years of Pilgrimage. So I read this first back in high school, and I remember this being one of my favorite books at the time. Like, after I finished it, I was just obsessed with it. A lot of time has passed since I first read it, and I've experienced so many new things. It will be interesting to see whether or not it will impact me as much as I did reading it back then. So I finished reading Colorless Sakura Tazaki and His Years of Pilgrimage. As I was reading it, parts of the book kept on coming back to me, and I found that I didn't forget as much as I thought I did. I quite enjoyed the story. As for what it's about a group of friends, and there's 5 of them, and essentially all of the members have names relating to color, except for Sakura. So there's Ao, Aka, Shiro, and Koro. This idea that he was colorless definitely impacted his life. Now looking back, I definitely feel like that was what I liked about the story. The fact that I could relate to the main character and how he struggled with thinking that he had nothing to offer and that he was just bland and colorless versus everyone around him sort of having a personality. This group of high school friends were really close, and they had the sort of connection that most people don't even have or don't get to experience within their lifetime. Then they go off to university. 4 of them remain in Nagoya, but Sakura Tazaki ends up going to Tokyo. After a certain period of time, Sakura's friends decide to kick him out of the group. The story is told with Sakura Tazaki now being a 36-year-old man, and essentially that event of being cut off with no explanation basically from his group of friends that he considered family, was such a traumatic experience for him that it still affects his relationships now. The whole book is an exploration of that event and sort of what happened, because even though he's now a grown man, he acknowledges the impact that that event might have had on his life and how he needs to address it, and there's no better time than the now. So the story itself delves into topics of depression, friendship, as well as love and understanding and forgiveness. I think that also a big part of this book is the fact that relationships, be it friendships or romantic or family, they have the ability to save you, but they also have the ability to take you to really dark places. And so it's not all good. Nonetheless, a lot of the time, these relationships are what make life worth living.